3rd, and we are here for the August meeting of the Board of Supervisors for Penn 1. This meeting is being recorded, and with that, I'll go ahead and do the roll call, starting with Claudio Campuzano.
Present.
PJ Christopher.
Present.
Annalisa Kohler.
Present.
And Jeff Noodleman is out today. This is James Allison. I'm present. That makes 4 out of 5, and we have a quorum. Moving to public testimony.
There is none.
Okay, and then item C. Nick, do we have any contract approvals this week?
We have no contracts for approval this week, sir.
Great, thank you, Nick. And item D, selection of officers. Emily?
Yeah, I wanted to, since you all just had your landowner meeting recently, usually we take this time to just make sure everyone's where they want to be as far as officers. Obviously, James has been serving as president, and then we did have like we moved around like the designation for the secretary to accommodate the boundary adjustment. So I think it's a perfect time for you all to come back through and make that official. And just as a reminder, sort of the real duties have to do with the president and facilitating the meetings. The secretary's a designation that we're required to have by statute, but it's atypical for you to be called upon to do anything particularly secretarial, but it is just something that we need to designate. So I guess you could go ahead and just nominate and just as a voice vote approve those 2 designations.
I guess one bit of discussion, does anybody, I'm happy to continue to serve as president for another year, but if anyone is anyone is interested in that position, I'm willing to yield and still remain on the board.
James, we're going to double your stock options in the enterprise as a result.
Thank you. I just can't help but look at Annalisa and Claudio and the smirk on their face. So I'll continue to serve on that role. Emily, who is currently the secretary? Who's designated that role? Is that?
Yeah, Annalisa is technically, and then we had temporarily transferred it to me, and so anyone who wants it, I think, is qualified on this board.
Well, in that case, I'll ask Annalisa, are you willing to serve for another year?
I'm happy to serve as another year, but similar to you, James, if there is someone who is very interested in being secretary, I will happily yield to them.
Great, thank you, Annalisa. So I guess now we need a motion to approve each office?
I think just as a slate should be sufficient.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to have James Allison continue as president and Annalisa Kohler continue as secretary.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, with no discussion, we'll do a roll call vote. Claudio Campuzano.
I vote aye.
PJ Christopher.
I vote aye.
Annalisa Kohler.
Aye.
And James Allison votes aye. That's unanimous. Thank you, folks. Much obliged. Item E, an update from Mark Wilcox on the PMLS and the cost sharing and funding options.
Hello, everyone. Jamie is going to kick us off and facilitate for us and help so you don't have to hear me quack the entire time.
So Mark, if you can just go ahead and share your screen, I would appreciate it.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. This is Jamie Damon with Kearns and West. I've been working with Mark and Evan and others on the PMLS conversations with all of the boards. And as you recall, about a month ago, we brought forward a kind of an 18-month look of the topics that we wanted to bring before you with regard to PMLS conversations. And the last conversation we had was about cost allocation. Those are the last 2 times we've talked with you, and you gave us some questions for us to bring back, and we promised that we would come back and bring the topic back in front of you, as well as some information about revenue options. So that's what we have for you today. So if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. So the objective is, there isn't a decision we're asking from all of you today. Again, this is to keep this topic in front of you. The more we talk about it, the more we're familiar and getting comfortable with the range of options that are before us. We do have some new information to share about the revenue options. And so we wanted to talk with you about that. And so the little mini agenda we put together for the half-hour topic here is Jim wanted to share with you just a reminder about why we're doing this work again. And then there was a visit from Major General Graham recently, and so he's got some information to share with you about that. We want to remind you about the possible funding or the cost allocation methods, and share with you information about the funding options, and also the follow-up of what we heard from our conversations in July. And then we'll open it up and see what questions you have for us today so we can advance this discussion moving forward. So I think with that, I'm handing it off to Jim, and the next slide is the why this matters. So Jim, take it away.
My best speeches are when I'm muted. You guys probably need this less than a couple of the other boards, so I'm going to try and truncate it a little bit. But we were talking about how to keep cost allocation front and center in our wonderful board members' minds. And just from my standpoint, being somewhat new and having a background in communications, when we were prepping, we kind of got right into the details, and that's awesome. And you guys as staff on the MCDD side, but also on the Penn 1 side, understand the importance of the details. But I also think when we're talking about money, it's really important to remember why we're here. So this slide in front of you just shows that we have a history of flooding in our system, and we will likely flood again. And again, the most recent experience we had with some pretty dangerous conditions was as recently as 2017. So we had Vanport, but we've also had a number of other incidents. And for those of you who are still able to watch a little bit of news or read a little bit of news, you may be reading about lots of crazy torrential rainfall in various places throughout the world, including right here in the United States. So if you would change the slide, please. So this is just a picture of Vanport. And again, just to put fresh in your mind what can happen if our system fails. If we may go one more slide. And this is from 1996. So you can see the river channel on the Columbia is a little bigger than it normally is here. It just gives you a sense of what happened in 1996. And one more, please. And these are pictures from just last month in Germany and other places where, again, we've experienced just insane amounts of rain in very short amounts of time. Historic is what people are saying. So the reason that I wanted you to see these pictures is that we're talking about $5 or $6 million to generate a huge federal investment in our little region to modernize and improve and make more resilient our flood control system, while also, we hope, with some local support, doing good things for water quality, doing good things around equity, and doing some amazing things around cultural history. And in order to get all that done, we really do need a new revenue source. We really do need the 2/3 share of the costs coming in from the federal government. And I would just close by saying, I can't think of another place where if I put 1/3 in, I would get a 2/3 return on my investment. It's pretty huge. And while we're really obligated to look very carefully and in great detail about how we share the costs for the preliminary engineering and design study, it's also really important for you as policymakers and leaders to remember why we're doing it, and that this is such a huge opportunity for us to get a massive federal investment locally. So while you're digging into the details, please keep in mind the big picture that we really do need to upgrade our system in Penn 1, but across the system. And this federal funding opportunity is our best chance to do it. And people really could suffer if we're not successful. So with that, I want to turn to some good news, and then I'll get you into the specifics, which is why you're here, which is talk about how we're going to get it done. About 2 weeks ago now, maybe a little bit longer, we had a visit to our system from Major General Graham from Washington, D.C. He's a key player in the Corps of Engineers, and we had a really great tour with the general, and we also had the local colonel with us, and we did a briefing in our conference room ahead of time and shared some food. The general asked a lot of questions. We went out on the road, and your staff did an amazing job describing all the work that we've done in partnership with City of Portland and Metro and Port and all our other great friends who've helped us get this far. And we got back to our office, and we had set up an alternative briefing for the general to ask more questions, having seen things out in the real world. And we had folks on WebEx from DC and Portland, and we were all ready to get grilled by the general. And as we were walking in from the car, we asked if he wanted to ask any more questions, and he said no. So you guys did an outstanding job, and you are exactly the kind of partners that we like to work with. And as a result of that visit and a little bit of follow-up work, the chief's report on our feasibility study was signed on Friday, which is a huge accomplishment for Mark, for Jamie, for Evan, for all of us. Not so much me, because I showed up late on the scene, but I can still take credit. Just a ton of work, and really moves us forward in the path towards a significant federal investment. So things are going really well on the core side. And today, what we need to do is get your minds back into, okay, we've got about $5.7-ish million that we have to contribute to this local share. We've identified a few potentially new funding sources outside of assessments that we want to talk to you about. And we also want to remind you of the methodology that we've started to work on to divvy up these costs in a fair and equitable way to modernize our system, prevent the flooding, and get that 2/3 federal investment. So I'm going to stop now, but I do want you to remember why you're here. People do suffer from flooding if we don't do our jobs. We really need your help coming up with a cost scheme that is feasible, that's workable, that's implementable, so we can move forward. Okay. I hope that wasn't too long or boring.
No, that was good. Thanks, Jim. So I think now we're going to turn it over to Mark, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the revenue options. Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Jamie. Hello, everyone, board members. Appreciate all the time you've given us to talk about these things and help you work through them. As we talk about, do sort of the review and some new information today, I just want to stress again what Jim said. What we're talking about is $5.674 million for PED. That is obviously the lion's share amongst all 4 districts, and we have some time to figure out these allocations. So we just want to make sure that it's not a 7th inning decision, and so we're trying to circulate this as we get information and wrap our heads around the possibilities. So starting with the new information, potential revenue options. Obviously, our concern as staff is to try to find options that minimize the impact on various boards. Different boards have different needs, and so while we have a few options shown on the screen here, most likely every board will possibly pick a smattering of some of these solutions if one solution doesn't meet their needs completely, and that's possibly likely. I will start off with one new source that's very promising. It's the State Levy Grant Fund through Business Oregon that is being put together. It'll be available in April 2023, and it provides for planning grants up to $2 million, as it states there, with the local match. If we divvy up $5.6 million among 4 districts in whatever way, it's easy to see that $2 million would cover most districts' fair share with the allocation methods that we've spoken to in the past. So that's very promising. It's a competitive grant, but obviously we've done a lot of work with the Corps. The Corps' feasibility study has a lot of data, which can fuel hopefully a successful grant application for each of the 4 districts. So that's very promising. Obviously, partner contributions are another possibility. We know we have various partner agencies, and we haven't really gone down that road of soliciting contributions. But obviously, as Jim stated, there's a lot to lose, and so we want to make sure that we use all available means, or we investigate all available means. We talked about assessments previously. Before Casey left, he's the best person to tell us, can we make do with assessments? And obviously that is not applied equally to all the districts. So the various districts have the option to continue to raise assessments the rate that they have over the last few years and address their needs. That may not be the case in our district. We know that we have unique challenges when it comes to revenue. So I'll move on to reserves. Is similarly for Penn 1 is perhaps not a big funding option for this district. And then we moved on to public and private loans. Public loans, I'm sure you're all familiar with. They're things like the IFA, Special Public Works Fund through Business Oregon. And some of these public financing options would require backing from some of our partners, similar to some of the Levy Ready Columbia IFA loans. The private loan option is sort of it is generally a contingency in our minds as staff, and what we might recommend once we're done with our research. There's some things that complicate private financing that some of you are aware of. Obviously, it's not the most attractive investment to a private bank, but if we should find a way for this to cover some portion of our needs, we will present that. And we have to consider that while it seems like the most expensive option, we currently obviously are in a situation where interest rates are at historic lows, and it would be an extremely good return on investment. So I'll just kind of let that soak for a minute. Evan, I don't know if I missed anything. If you'd like to add, it looks like PJ has a question. Go ahead, PJ.
A number of questions. So, Evan, did you have something you wanted to add before I ask?
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I just want to emphasize for folks is we are showing you these options early, even though we have additional work to do, just to really, we really want folks to understand that the revenue options may influence the cost allocation methodology. For instance, if we could get a levy grant for each of the districts, then we're not talking up there, we'll still have to come up with some sort of cost allocation methodology to be able to write the grants to figure it out and spread it. But obviously we will be trying to get each of you the maximum, so we wouldn't have to use any of these other methods. And I think, so as we sort of focus on the cost allocation discussion, we just want to make sure that you know that we are looking at 4 options that don't necessarily require us going down the road of assessments and other ways where the cost allocation might be more important. Thank you, PJ.
Yeah. So I think you kind of answered one of my questions, but I just want to be clear. So earlier it was stated we're in search of $5 to $7 million, give or take. Is that just for Penn 1, and then Penn 2 is looking for 5 to 7, MCDD is looking for 5 to 7, and SDIC is looking for 5 to 7?
No, that's a good question. But as I indicated earlier, it is estimated to be $5.6 million, and that is distributed among the districts.
Among all 4 districts.
Among all 4 districts, and we provide in the meeting materials. You should see a representation of that. We presented last month at the format, and so that we provided that in your packet just so that you have that for reference. So if you look at that, you'll see the various allocation methods, which we'll talk about in a moment, distribute that accordingly by various methods. So, but yeah, I think 2.3 is the largest number through any allocation method by any district, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. PED stands for what?
That stands for pre-construction engineering design, and it's CORE loves their acronyms. It's a very long-winded way of saying design phase, and that is a design phase that can occur prior to authorization. There's a lot of different combinations, and you can roll design into the construction phase, but the way that our CORE team has laid it out. They laid out a best case scenario, and that includes PED phase that lasts about 3.5 years. They expect or hope that we might get authorized and funded about 2 years into that, and then the rest of the design rolls into construction. But in short, it's 3.5 years of design, covers that 5.6 million. And if for some reason we start construction early, then it all gets rolled in and into construction, and then it could be funded by the new urban flood safety and water quality district.
And one more question, and it's more of just a confirmation. So I see partner contributions as one of a potential revenue options. As an example of that in practice and in actual work, the city of Portland's work that they do, or the money that they provide to Penn One on some of the projects that we're working on, it'd just be more of that. So jurisdictions like the city of Portland and others, right?
Correct.
Okay.
PJ, just for a little additional context, we do cost allocation methodologies all the time for the districts, because we operate in this funny way where we are one district with one set of staff, one set of equipment that operate and maintain a system that operates in unison, but has 4 separate boards. So some of the cost allocation methodologies that Mark is getting ready to talk through, we use all the time to figure out how to share in all of these costs. So that's something that we do quite a bit, just to figure out how to pay for things across 4 districts.
Thank you.
It looks like Claudio, do you have your hand up?
I do. So just a quick question. I look at the middle one assessments, and I know that we are definitely not among those districts that could increase assessments and cover the bill. So was just wondering, which are the districts that are in that kind of position?
All of them except for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
And currently STIC, I think, could probably fund it without increasing its assessments based on the reserves they've got set aside.
Okay.
And
That's
two
helpful.
possibly as well.
Right.
Great. And then also, as we look at these going forward, I appreciate the pros and cons that we've got in the next couple of slides, looking at sort of similar sort of decision matrix, like pros, cons, feasibility, options, kind of filling that out. Just I appreciate the discussion, but as we kind of build that out, kind of seeing those options a little bit more clearly defined and viewed, so that we can weigh them up against each other a little bit better. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
The
Claudia.
Oops, sorry, Jamie.
I was just going to say, Claudia, I didn't see your hand up because you have a yellow background and you've got a yellow hand. I hadn't seen that before.
The other option that isn't on here, but that I think this board should think about approaching the other boards about, is PED is really the way that I've been describing PED to people. It's the ticket to ride. We all have to participate in PED and pay for the design phase to get to that big chunk of money that comes with construction. And so, certainly there is a discussion for this board to have around talking to the other districts about ways of supporting this through the methods that they're considering. Because if one of you couldn't come along, the Corps doesn't see us as 4 separate systems, 4 separate boards. They see one system. And if one part of the system isn't able to come along, that won't work for them. They're not gonna just say, okay, fine, whatever, we'll take 3 of you. So we didn't put it on here, but it is something that that we brought up as staff and talked about, is should the other 3 districts be thinking about helping Penn One, because this is our ticket to ride.
James?
Thank you. Quick question, maybe a couple of quick questions. One is, sorry if I missed this, but as far as the state levy grant fund goes, do you think that MCDD staff would approach application of applying to the grant fund on behalf of the 4 districts as one, and then apportion the need across the districts, or would we be looking at 4 separate applications?
So we're going to be having a discussion with Business Oregon about this relatively soon. My guess from seeing how they've done things in the past, they would be able to give us more money if we did it as 4 separate applications, because they are only allowed to give a single entity up to $2 million per biennium with our local match. So if we went in as just one application, they would only be able to give us up to 2 million. The thing we want to talk to them further about is sort of the way this project works, you know, seen as one project at the federal level, but we have 4 separate districts. I don't think they're going to think that's a problem, because we've funded things through them in the past where they've understood that we've had multiple districts helping to fund one project, and they do that all the time with capital projects. But I'm just waiting for some of their rulemaking. We're participating in the rulemaking process for the state levy grant fund, and so we're just waiting for a little bit of that to get buttoned up a little bit more before we start to have conversations with the exact same staff about how they could they potentially help us figure out how to shape an application.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. Sounds like more to come. And then the second question is, and this sort of alludes to where Penn One may have leverage or be able to leverage a conversation with the other boards. At what point in the process, and I assume it's downstream of PED, at what point would Penn One ostensibly get credit for real estate and new real estate and easement added to the system? Because we have a big chunk of the project. We also have a big cost share if we're giving up land and easements, et cetera.
Yeah, the real estate credits all occur and during the PPA or the construction phase, and they do a balance sheet. We being the 4 districts pay the minimum cash value of 5% upfront that first year, and then we pay if we didn't have such a real estate, and relocations really comprise the majority of our local cost share. So ordinarily we would be giving them more cash each year, but in this case we're providing the real estate package each year as we're going through the various increments or phases. And so that all gets calculated out that far. And so we obviously need to know, the staff is working on the real estate and knowing exactly where we have fully capable easements for each project to the extent of both O&M as well as construction. And we're doing that gap analysis that you've seen in annual budget approvals. So we have a better sense of it. But yeah, the math is done. We sort of have sort of towards the end of PED and the beginning of construction phase is when we know where we're coming up short and we have to actually purchase real estate versus using those existing easements. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. Yeah, thanks, appreciate it.
So actually just following up on that, so the PED costs, and forgive me, I feel like I should know this already, but the PED costs do or do not include acquisition costs?
No, PED costs do not include acquisition. Acquisition starts to begin at the very end of PED. We'll receive basically a notice to proceed letter. Actually, heard the Corps call it something else. They always keep me fresh. But they give us a list of properties that we are now entitled to get credit for should we purchase them. Prior to that, everything is at risk. But at the end of PED is when that starts, the acquisition begins to occur. And one other thing, since we're going a little down the real estate rabbit hole, it's very important to note as we discuss real estate further, particularly with public properties, if the Corps has done sort of a market value of properties that we need easements for throughout the whole system and throughout the project. And that's what they've established. Their LURDs, or basically lands and real estate and relocation costs value at, and that's how we've established this large contribution to the local cost share. If we get easements that we don't think we have in hand from partners at lower value than that, we still get credit for that established value that they gave us. And they will actually give us credit if we end up having to pay for up to 110% of the cost of those lands. If for some reason we come up with properties where we don't need to purchase new easements, then we'll have to contribute to the Corps through cash contributions. So it won't change the amount of value in the end that we're contributing towards the local cost share that we're required to contribute, but it'll just be cash versus real estate. So if you're looking at a big picture from the local sponsors as a team, and the local sponsors and all our partners, it really behooves us to try to find a way to get low or no cost easements, because then the public wins. Hopefully that makes sense. I'll just kind of let that sit so that I am so immersed in this. Sometimes Evan has to cross-check me on whether that landed right or not, because I get it. I've been breathing this forever, but yeah. So there's some value to the public. Obviously, each agency or partner has their own interests to protect and their needs, but if we can bring the maximum number of public lands to the table at no or low cost, then we all win, because that $45 million might actually be much less if we get credit for it from the Corps.
One more loose end to potentially throw out there, and we're just beginning the investigation as of this morning or Friday, is that it's possible, but we don't know yet, that if and when the urban district passes a capital bond or the voters adopt a capital bond to fund the broader local share of implementation of PMLS plus other things that we might put in that bond, that the bond could reimburse costs for PED. But again, we don't know that for sure, but it's one of the options that we're looking at. And there still may be a timing or cash flow problem that we would need to address. Main message you guys need to hear is we are going to need some money from the city of Portland, from Metro, almost certainly, and we're looking for every way to make that a small amount of money as possible, and to ultimately have the voters pay it back if we can. So
no, that's useful, Jim. Thank you. And as I look at the public loan option, I wonder if, while it may not be possible to pay back partner contributions, if we were to take loans for some of those partner contributions, and those loans are become liabilities that come into the district, can they then be funded through a general obligation bond? So I'm hoping that staff is looking into that, because I don't want to preempt the conversation about allocation, but I think it's no surprise to folks here that very edgy around setting any kind of precedent for what rates look like in the new district. And I feel like how we set these allocations is going to be perceived as a precedent for how we should be establishing rates or any kind of differentials going into the district. And one of the precepts that we've hung on to through this whole thing is that this is a networked system where where the asset is doesn't necessarily speak to how it provides service and where it provides service. And so just as we continue this conversation, I just want to be real cognizant of how we every decision we make about splitting costs becomes an additional marker on that path toward the eventual rate model for the district. So I just want to be real careful about that.
Yeah, you are not the only board member to raise that concern, nor the only board. And one of the things, I think it might even be in the next slide, is that we think it's going to be important, depending on how this plays out for the preliminary engineering work, that we actually have all the boards adopt something that says, we don't mean this to be precedential, unless they mean it to be. But we hear you, and we think we need to be deliberate about that. And we do think there are some tools that boards have to make sure they're being clear that this is either presidential or it's not. And we think it probably isn't, so.
Well, and what we've found is it doesn't have to be. You're the ones that will be passing a resolution ultimately when we make this decision, or if we make this decision about cross allocation. And so we can just be very explicit in that resolution that this is not intended to influence anything else except for the design phase. And we can be very, very, we can make sure that it's very clear in your policies that that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I think your goal is to we can be prescriptive, and this is for PED, it is for design, and the methods are applicable for design phase, but other phases it may be appropriate to use other allocation methods. So,
but Claudia, coming from a general funded program at Metro, I would just want to let you know that I share your fear that it's like the city council passing a resolution that tells the enterprise bureaus if they're going to create costs for a general fund bureau, they got to cover those, and the resolution's worth the paper it's printed on, and the rest happens in the budget process. So I get that I guess I want to say your concern is valid, and we're going to keep a strong eye on it.
So we're coming up against the end of our agenda time. I know that we started a little bit early, so we grabbed a bit more time, but there are a few slides that Mark wanted to go through to remind everybody about the cost allocation methodologies that are on the table. And then he did advance forward to our July slide of what we heard, and he has some things to share about that. So I want to make sure we get through that. Evan, I cut you off. What were you going to say?
That's okay. Thank you for being timekeeper. I'll raise it the next time we talk about this issue.
Okay. So Mark, do you want to go ahead and remind folks about the cost allocation methodologies, and we'll go from there.
Try to boil this down really quickly. I feel like most of you followed the previous conversations, but a refresh is always good. So we have a set of leading methods and a set of reference methods, and the leading methods are just, we're not, we heard, one of the things we heard from everyone is that we don't want to make any decisions or boil things down now. We still felt like these are the most, possibly the most articulate, most compelling methods that we want to keep at the forefront, because they have the most in each category, whether you're talking about benefits received or costs incurred. They have the leading metrics to support those components. And so we have these composite methods, which break up general costs and specific costs of each project, further split down and supported either by metrics such as project costs in composite 2 or benefits received. I skipped over economic benefits. That one's pretty straightforward. And again, I think at the format we talked a little bit about how that was arrived at. It was damages avoided, and the numbers that we're using that have advanced through time. We previously had very rudimentary economic benefits data. Then we did some work through Levy Ready Columbia that gave us FEMA HAZIS model numbers, which are replacement values. And then now we are at a much more sophisticated and nationally accepted tool, the HEC FDA model. CORE uses HEC models for everything, and it's a HEC flood damage model, and that includes other commerce disruptions, and it includes and it does include replacement cost of buildings as well as contents, and it's all linked into the flood damage modeling, geotechnical fragility modeling, and so it's all probabilistic based and very apportioned accordingly. So pretty sophisticated method, and we are proposing either to use that as a metric or incorporate it into one of these composites. Now, backing up to the reference methods, these all look familiar. As Evan said earlier, these are the methods that we typically allocate costs, things like levy margin.
Sorry, Mark, do you mind just going back to the last slide? I do have one question about composites 2 and 3. So you've got shared costs 43%, and then the only difference between 2 and 3 is that the other 57% is project cost by district or benefits received by district. And I was just wondering, A, what exactly are we talking about when we talk about shared costs, and how did we get the 43-57% split?
Yeah, so the shared costs are, let me back up. The 57% is from the Corps cost estimates. 57% of the costs are like directly attributable to individual project measures. So those are based on the unit cost estimates for each project. So 57% of the costs are direct line items based on unit cost, cubic yards of soil, thickness of asphalt, all those sorts of things by district. And so they're very specific to location. The 43% are everything else that is required to complete the project that is less specific to location, such as the general concept design, planning, public involvement, and all those things that are much harder to pin to individual districts. Obviously, just preparation of the overall report, that's it's much more diffuse, and so we generalize those costs in that way. So
that's super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so going back, so we can see that previous slide was all sort of costs. You know, we look at like how utility rates are calculated, costs incurred, benefits received. Those were all sort of catering to that mindset. These things are all still metrics that could be sort of are analogous to those things. Acreage we sometimes use as a surrogate for costs incurred or benefits received, really, because you're just trying to scale the relative impact between districts. Same thing with levy mile, just but based on the levy work. But we know they're not that precise. And in this study case, we can't use levy mile, or levy mile is not really applicable because we're doing different amounts of work on different levies. It also doesn't speak to the actual amount of fragility or the likelihood of a failure of a levy, and then what are the actual consequences from that particular failure to that district or the other district. And we know that we have this cascading failure scenario. None of that's taken into account by these more simple metrics. The cost-based, that's very straightforward for some. We have both the PED cost per district and the overall project cost per district. And the next slide shows those two numbers are very, very similar. They're not very different. So we're almost mincing hairs. So then replacement value, as I mentioned earlier, that sort of has us, it's a precursor to what the new data that we have that's much more sophisticated and based on our actual modeled failure scenarios. And then there's equal distribution. If, as Evan pointed out, we get to a point where maybe we get a state levy grant for everyone and we take care of the lion's share of the cost, is something more equivalent between the districts more appropriate? Do we have reason to draw these lines and worry about the allocations as much? So that's a very simplistic view. I don't want to overstate that one, but it's out there. So here are the methodologies, as you stated before, or as we heard some board members state, we like certain measures, but we want to see them all up. We don't want to like close the discussion. And we are used to and comfortable with some of these traditional metrics. And so we want to see them up there and see how everything plays against those traditional metrics, just because that's what we're familiar with. So this stuff is in your board packet, and it was presented in July. And we also presented it in some different ways so that you could see bar graphs by district and by method to try to do more, get beyond staring at a bunch of numbers, and that some of us are better or worse than that. So so those are the cost allocation methodologies, and happy to take questions. I might save those till the very end, since I know we're running on time, unless someone has an important clarifying question. Okay, I don't see any, so okay. I heard a voice. Is there a question, or?
No, I was just saying I didn't see any hands. I'm up.
Okay, thanks.
Doesn't mean you're not hearing voices, Mark. It could be true.
Every day, Jim. Okay, so I think we talked about several of these already. I'll go through quickly. The first one is a new one for our discussion today. You heard a request to consider how deferred maintenance was considered, or how additional efforts to improve the system were taken into account. And some districts felt like, does that give some people more credit, if you will, and maybe should that be considered in the allocation methods? And what I've stressed to previous boards is that that the project, the core planning process form and the plan formulation doesn't allow for consideration of deferred maintenance. And so we actually had, as you're familiar with, if there's one project you should be familiar with, it's PIR, and the Corps considered that, but for multiple reasons it dropped out. And one reason was some of their policy reviewers and technical reviewers considered PIR more of a deferred maintenance kind of project than some of the other pump station projects. They also had other reasons. It was the level at which, the threshold at which economic damages actually started happening. It was much later because of the large storage in the golf course and the raceway. So there's multiple reasons. So that's just one example. There was, but all the projects are were basically selected on capacity that didn't meet our needs for the next 50 years. So sort of a modernization issue. Or a fragility or vulnerability issue. So the railroad embankment, there's no attribution involved. The Corps recognizes that they handed us a railroad embankment that needs to be modernized. It wasn't adequate from the beginning, and so now they're getting around to taking care of that. There are new sections of levee in SDIC that are not adequate. It's not due to any fault of the maintaining district or operating district. Sandy Pump Station, over time we found out it wasn't really that product that they handed over wasn't adequate in the long run. And then Penn 2 MCDD cross levee and the small section of MCDD levee there, those are all areas that there's no amount of maintenance aside from major overhaul would have resolved the issues that we're trying to address now. So that hopefully that speaks to how the Corps arrived at these projects and how deferred maintenance was not factored into economic benefits nor in plan formulation. I spoke to the second item, and we spoke a little to the third item. I think hopefully, in summary, we are very sensitive to this and we're aware of this. We do think that you have a great influence on how you can document decisions made to minimize the possibility of a precedent being set. But we are aware, as we said, sometimes the sausage gets made differently, and so we're paying close attention to that. There were some questions about authorities and spending limits. SDIC brought that up with respect to the ability to spend money outside of their district. We did some legal analysis of that and confirmed that that the guiding authorities and references do provide for spending outside the district when the benefits received are within the district. And the Corps' feasibility study approach and modeling clearly documents where and how those benefits are received. So we feel pretty confident that districts can spend outside, and in some cases, because of the incongruence of our district boundaries and our actual levies and where some of our facilities are located, we don't even want to strictly interpret things because that would be a disadvantage to some of the districts. So I see a question from Jamie. James. I'm just gonna throw these other two topics out, and then just in the interest of efficiency, and then I'll grab your question. That's okay. Okay. So there was some appetite for potential board presentations, and on the two topics listed there, how were economic benefits gathered and calculated how was life loss modeling even factored into the whole plan formulation process, and how was it determined. And there's a lot of sophistication behind that. And after talking to the other boards, we arrived at the conclusion that we will provide kind of a summary document for starters and see if that whets your appetite. I could probably go into painfully gory detail that nobody, almost as painful as trying to read those appendices. And we certainly can make sure that you have those materials. They're going to be available for you very shortly, but we'll try to summarize them and see if that meets your needs, and certainly can refer to the economics appendix and the life loss modeling appendix to understand them better. But we'll see where we land after we produce those for you. Okay.
So I just really want to appreciate the sharing of that information. And I think it's important not just to share it, but to remind. I mean, I think that we've had a lot of different folks involved over the years, and the folks that are in the board supervisor seats now. I think it'd be really useful for them to understand that this project would not have moved forward but for the economic benefits and the life loss modeling. And as you said, for example, there were some elements that were excluded because they didn't meet those thresholds. For example, the PIR pump station, and that really informs the whole the whole justification for the project as a whole, and that that modeling should be a key piece of information as we think about things going forward.
Thanks, Claudia, for that comment and observation. And as you were talking, it just reminded me, we actually, early on in the process, we had to do some, we had to revisit the economic benefits analysis to make sure that Pen 1 and Pen 2 stayed in the study. So we kind of tighten our sharpen our pencils and look for more assets in Pen 1 and Pen 2. The Corps was looking at the cost benefit of the railroad and wondering if it was all worthwhile. So we turned over some stones and found some public assets that weren't computed through sort of default methodology and included them. So it was pretty detailed and exhaustive. So happy to share details for anybody that wants to go into it, but otherwise you'll see our summary.
And I'm sorry to belabor this point. I know we've got other items on the agenda, and we're short on time. I know this is a really important one, and one that we've been meaning to open up for quite some time. So my apologies for extending it a bit. But one thing that occurs to me, while I think my concerns about precedent, and apparently there are other folks that have those concerns. One way to sort of address those potentially is to look at a methodology that we haven't looked at, which is accelerating the rate model and applying a sort of a virtualized rate model to it, and having the districts cover that. I think that's a big and important conversation that it would be a shame if we kept on pushing that one off as well. And I know that that's a question for the urban, not for us as individual boards, but it feels to me like if people are concerned about setting precedent, well, then let's set a precedent that we want to emulate.
So Jim is talking about that one, Claudio, and you may have talked to him directly about it. But the thing that I want to, that's a great consideration. And I think Jim could tell you all about his thoughts about how we do that.
We just share our mind, it's we haven't talked about it. So
the challenge we come up against, that I think, just as you all think about that, is a timing one where if the Corps says, you're authorized, or we're ready to go, even though you haven't been authorized yet, we have this amount of money that we're willing to put forward now. And if you don't take it, we're going to give it to somebody else, and they're going to get to start moving before you do. And so that's the one, so we're talking May 2023 for the new district, and we need to have some cash on hand to give the Corps in October 2022. I think we could figure it out. It's just that one timing piece so that we don't miss they do these things where they open the door for you, and if you're not ready to take it, they'll say, okay, back of the line, and we're not coming back to you for a couple of years. And so that's the one piece that we'll need to be ready for thinking about.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's where I would sort of push in and wonder if we have an opportunity to pursue any of those financing models.
Yeah, so it looks like James has his hand up, and then we probably should wrap this up.
Great, thanks. I just want to reiterate or acknowledge what Claudio said, which is I appreciate the work, Jamie, Evan, and Mark, kind of being an objective consultant to the boards, recognizing that these large levy projects would not fall into any individual board's capital work plan. This goes beyond the scale and scope of those things. And then reminding us that the PIR pump station is not part of a liability that we're bringing forward into the PMLS. We may bring it forward into the new district, but maybe not at the rate we're trying to chip away at that. So I really appreciate your guidance and objectivity and your knowledge of these different allocation models. One question or methodologies. One question I have is, is the economic benefits composite 1, composite 2, and composite 3, are those all still on the table? Or are we just down to 2 and 3?
Yes, they're all on the table. Everything is on the table based on what we heard from the boards last month. We certainly are looking for, and we're certainly looking for other refinements. I mean, we're not looking to, we're not searching for additional, just to come up with a bunch of additional ones. But certainly, if there are things that we haven't thought through enough, or you have other metrics that we haven't considered, we're certainly open to suggestion. But those are sort of our best formats at this point. And you know, we're trying to come up with something that's fair and defensible and easy to articulate.
Great, thank you.
And I would just close with, I know Jamie is gonna move us along here, that we don't think you need to make a decision on this until spring of 2022. You know, we want to be moving towards making that decision so that when we do have to sign the design agreement, we aren't scrambling to have a really difficult conversation. But you know, over the next few months, we may sort of back off on this and bring you other content relative to what we're doing. But you know, want to keep this fresh, but also know that you've got some time to keep working through this. And I know that Jim is making sure that we're talking about advancing that new district so that we have that information by the time we get closer to that decision point.
Yeah, and I would suggest that you go back and look at that 18-month work plan of the topics that we've mapped out for your future meetings about how we're organizing these conversations. There was a lot of discussion today about, you know, real estate and when do we start talking about that. And we've mapped that out, for example, about when we bring those to you. And we've made a commitment to bring any of these topics to you in like a 3-meeting format because we understand that it takes a little bit to get comfortable and familiar with these concepts. So, so go ahead and take a look at that and you'll see future topics that are coming up.
I guess the last thing we've offered all the other boards is if any of you want to go deeper, one or many of us would be more than happy to grab a breakfast, a coffee, a lunch, a beer, whatever it takes to let you feel comfortable asking any questions that you want. So we'd be happy to spend that time if any of you as individuals or small groups would like us to help you walk through more detail.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate that offer. I also I know in these last couple of minutes, just want to say, I think it would be helpful if we as a board could have a discussion about which of these different allocation methods we might be interested in supporting as a board. I don't know if we can get to a consensus position. It might not make sense. But I would love to at least have the discussion and see if that isn't possible. I think it would help move conversation along if we as a board are operating from a consensus position. So wondering if that is something we can put on future agendas.
The answer is absolutely yes. And I think it's going to be on pretty much all of your agendas until we get the money raised. So what the specific conversations will be may vary depending on how we're doing, but But I like that idea, Annalisa. I think that's, it'll be interesting to see which board goes first. But I think you're right. I think there's a strategic play here, particularly those of you with all the public ownership. I'd be happy to help scheme with you if that's helpful and beneficial to you as board members.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And I think that's why we're trying to be so thoughtful and deliberate about how we bring this information and sort of bring folks along, is so that we can get to that place. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here.
And we're glad. And you'll probably be seeing more of Jamie too if we have our way. So.
Okay, so I think that's it. Mark, Evan, did we do it? Okay, good to see you all. Thanks for spending time with us. We'll see you again soon. I'm going to turn the meeting back over to James, I think.
Great, thank you, Jamie.
Great. Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah, and thank you to the staff for, as usual, doing this roadshow at least 4 times, probably 5 if you consider the new district. And thanks to the individual board members. You folks have contacted me wanting to make sure we have a board meeting, a public board meeting, where we discuss our opinion and come to agreement on what we're going to push forward on as we engage the other boards. So please help me in keeping that front and center. But I want to acknowledge the board members for really tracking this issue. So thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, you guys. It's underlying pretty much every discussion and every part of our work program right now. So comes down to the money as usual.
Thank you, Jim. I think you're up next for the executive director's report.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. Chief's report on our feasibility study was signed on Friday. So I want to say congratulations to the team you just heard from for getting all that work done. We got it done ahead of schedule and under budget. So wow, really good news, and a ton of work. We had a really great visit from the Major General from DC, who I guess, just to cut it short, said, you guys are exactly the kind of partners we like to work with. So we have a strong vote of confidence from the leadership of the Corps. So thanks to everybody who helped put together the tour for him and answer all his questions. He didn't even take the full opportunity to ask questions because he felt like we'd done such a good job. We have signed a contract with Echo Northwest to advance the rate discussion. So we have both a urban board subcommittee that has about 100 people on it, and we're going to be looking to form probably a technical advisory committee too, where we might be able to get some additional expertise from those who are in the know on these things. And we've got some ideas about the kinds of people we'd like to have help us with that work. If you know of someone or you yourself want to track this project, let Nick or me know, and we'd be happy to have your assistance, especially those of you in finance. Hint, hint. I want to let you know that there is a vacancy on the urban board, and that vacancy needs to be filled with someone who is affiliated with a not-for-profit with expertise or interest in the floodplain. They do not have to be physically located in the floodplain. So if you know of somebody who would be great, this person or whoever we end up with will be replacing Paul Lumley of NIA, who's you can't really replace Paul because he's so knowledgeable and has so many such great lived experience and connections, but we do need a board member. And so again, send your suggestions in to Emily, or you could send them to me, or if you happen to know Mike Jordan, who's the chair of the urban board, you could let him know as well. We have another week or 10 days to get those ideas in, Emily, is that right? So, okay, Nick, you got that Claudio wants to be helping with the rates, and I think that would be great. We continue, as you heard, to seek revenues from both the state and the federal governments to help advance our little enterprise. Starting this fall, I don't want to put Nick on the spot, we're going to be bringing you financial information about your organization in Penn 1 on a regular basis. So we're going to start bringing you updated fiscal information more frequently. And couple of updates on homelessness. The city of Portland is about to engage in a pretty significant investment in cleanup around Delta Park. So obviously we're going to be trying to coordinate with them and some of our properties and easements in that area, and we're grateful to the work the city's putting in. We continue to work with PBOT and others around Pump Station 4, which is out at the Big Four Corners natural area. We've really gotten good support from PBOT. We appreciate that Parks is sending rangers out there more often. We're collaborating with Water, who has wellheads out there. We did get informed by the Portland Police that we can't avail ourselves of their special duty program, in which you can hire off-duty officers to help out. They don't like that. It doesn't fit with the program. So we're going to continue to talk with them, with the Sheriff's Office, and we're reaching out to some private security firms to see if we can make sure our ops team feels safe out there. It is important for me to let you know in advance that in September, we hope to bring you some draft legislation that would articulate our authority to manage the time, place, and manner of uses of both the property that we own and the property that we have easements on. The reason for that is there is a lot of damage being caused to our levees, and there is some trouble accessing some of our critical pump stations, relief wells, and other facilities. And so it will make it a little bit simpler for us to help people avoid those areas and to help get them to move to another safe and compassionate spot if we really articulate those authorities and put some signage up and so on. So be looking for that at your September meeting. We'll also be engaged in probably some additional signage and so on those facilities. We did do a cleanup at Schmear Road. We had to access some facilities there. And I just want to thank our ops team and Bill Owen, head of engineering, who pulled together all the vendors to get that work done in a compassionate way. We're talking with Metro to see if we can get some additional support for illegal dumping cleanup. We've had an initial conversation with their program, and we're preparing a list of sites that seem to be trouble for us. And that will beget the next phase of a conversation about us either investing in that program or gaining some expertise or going our own way. But I want to thank Metro for being willing to entertain the conversation. A couple more things and I will free you. We have an equity policy for the Multnomah County Drainage District #1, and we're going to be bringing you in September a adapted version of that policy for your consideration. My objective is to get really clear, consistent policy framework for our team to really advance equity in our organizations. MCDD has a lot of staff, so a lot of the policy that MCDD's board adopted had to do with staff. Since you guys don't currently employ staff, we're going to adapt it a little bit, but be looking forward to that, and I'll be really welcoming your feedback. And again, my objective is to get a consistent foundation for us to move forward aggressively on removing barriers and making sure we have a safe and welcoming place for people to work. We have launched a comp class study internally, just so you know, to make sure we're being equitable and we're obeying the law and making sure it's transparent how people get promoted. We have recently done some anti-harassment training, and we're going to be doing some implicit bias training as well, which I'm pretty excited about. And we are looking at our COVID policies, probably moving in a direction, we're just exploring it now, of increasing the incentives for vaccination and removing some incentives for lack of vaccination. So we're going to be trying to get our team as vaccinated as we can be, because we need to be able to operate in the rainy season. And so we're working on that. And last, I just want to welcome a new team member. Aster Moulton has joined us. I think they've been on the job now 5 hours, so they've got it all figured out. But we're very fortunate. Aster comes to us with some experience at TriMet working on the Southwest Corridor project, which, if you don't know, has done some of the most innovative work on equity and anti-displacement and anti-racism in all of the TriMet projects. And it's super cool and great co-creation of stuff. Super fun. And then also has worked at the Bureau of Environmental Services, so has some background in the field, as it were, of moving water around. So Aster, welcome. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I didn't tell you I was going to do this, but since you joined, we're really excited to have Aster joining us. And they'll be working with our comms team and our outreach team, and really helping us connect to the public and build new relationships, particularly with some underserved communities. So Aster, you don't have to say anything, but if you'd like to, you certainly may.
I just want to say thanks for the introduction, and I'm excited to get to know you all better.
We're fortunate to have you. Welcome aboard. And with that, there's plenty more going on, but I am actively stirring the pot to see if we can't speed up the process of developing a revenue model and moving towards that new utility And my current goal is to work with our team to see if we can't come up with a timeline that gets us to May of 23 instead of May of 25. I don't know that it's going to be possible, but we're going to take a good hard look at it. We think it's worth trying, and we think the legislation was pretty clear. And after 3 months on the job, it's clear we're spending an awful lot of time and resources managing things that could be done more efficiently. And so most of the people I'm talking with would love to see us be successful. We just need to dig in and see what the details really are. And it's a lot of work for a small team to move that quickly, and we want to get it right. But we're gonna mess with it a little bit, see what we can do. I'll stop talking now and let you guys go free, or you more than willing to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Jim? Great. Well, I think if that were at new business, is there any new business? We covered it all today. Great. Well, with that, I guess we will adjourn. And as always, again, thank you to the board. Thank you to the staff. Welcome, Aster. And we will see you folks next time. Enjoy your last couple of weeks of summer.
You too. Thank you all for your service. Really appreciate your time.
You too.
Thanks,
Thank you.